This is Transistor.fm.
And welcome back to the Product People Podcast. Justin Jackson here. If you want to get me on Twitter, I'm the letter M, the letter I, Justin, M-I Justin. So glad to be back again. We've been pretty consistent with publishing these mega profitable case studies. Again, if you want them to be emailed to you, go to megamaker.co/profit. And I will send you the previous case studies. These have graphs, revenue, expenses, and profit numbers for people like Nick DeSabato, Brennan Dunn, and this week, Natalie Nagele from Wildbit. And she got right into the history of Wildbit, how they started as a web development agency building Flash websites for nightclubs, and eventually built the product empire that they have today. It's really great. You're going to enjoy it. Let's get into that conversation. Natalie, tell me about your business and how it started, and what kind of business you're in. Like, what does your product do?
Sure. So I run Wildbit, which is a software company. We have our own products. So Wildbit is kind of the company, and then we have 3 products going on 4 that help other software developers and designers do their work better or enjoy their work better. And so we have a product that turns 10 this year called Beanstalk, which is Git hosting and deployments, kind of like a collaboration workflow for development teams. We have an email product called Postmark that sends transactional emails for apps. So things like password reset emails, welcome emails, that kind of stuff. We have a little deployment robot called DeployBot that helps you ship your code from anywhere. So if you're hosted with GitHub or Bitbucket or whatever. And then we have a 4th product on the way that is in private beta right now called conveyor.com. And that is our kind of reimagined Beanstalk. If we were solving that problem today, what would it look like? And so after 10 years, we think that problem would be a little bit different.
Yeah.
So we are trying to do it better. So that's our kind of new iteration.
That's awesome. Now, so you started Beanstalk 10 years ago.
Yes, but the company's 17 years old.
Oh, okay. What were you doing before that?
So Chris started. So I run the company with my husband Chris, and he started the business doing consulting work.
Okay.
Started with like awesome Flash websites for nightclubs. It was brilliant, beautiful work, beautiful.
Okay, this is a piece of history that I did not know. It's
a great history.
Is this on the Wildbit about page? I'm going to check right now. I want to see.
Flash. I mean, I'm sure there's Flash nightclubs. Yeah. There's a lot of, it's a fun history. I mean, when I met Chris, he had been doing it for 3 years, so we didn't have products yet, but we doing a lot of client work. We moved on, graduated from like Flash nightclub brochure site to building social networks. And we were doing that for a while.
Really?
So, and doing for customers, like for client work, and built some really great social networks for other clients. But that was like a big thing. We wrote a social network report that became like hugely popular. I mean, back in the day when that was like a big thing and people were trying to get in and create communities for their communities, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then, eventually got into product. So we were doing consulting. We actually had an email marketing service in the early 2000s that we built for our clients.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess
Newsberry?
Mid 2000s. Yeah, Newsberry. So that was our very first kind of foray into product. And then that's no longer in existence. And then Beanstalk we built because we were doing client work and Chris was managing SVN repositories and like hosting them locally, trying to set permissions and doing all this crap. And it was really annoying. And back then there really wasn't anything like there was CVS dude, if you remember what
Yeah.
Yeah. So we started asking friends. We were like, hey, would you let me host your source code and like we'll manage it for you? And they're like, no, you're crazy. I'm never letting you touch my source code. And Chris was like, whatever, we'll just try it. And so we did. We just tried it. And that's kind of how we got into products. And so we launched this thing and just kept doing client work on the side. And basically the plan was always that we would never fire anybody. So we needed Beanstalk to make enough money so that everybody who was working on client work would just, it would support all of us, right? So maybe it'll migrate to all hands on Beanstalk.
There's actually a few things I wanted to dig into there. 3 things.
Yeah.
First of all, what gave you the imagination for products in the first place? Like, how did you're running a consulting agency. How did you even know that was a thing, that was, possible?
And products were starting to become a thing, right? Basecamp was a thing. At that point, MailChimp was a thing, so there were things, right? Like there was a very slow kind of, I was just saying to somebody, like, apps were launching monthly, but they were launching, right? So they weren't like it wasn't hourly like it is today, but there was this sense of like, we can productize and create recurring revenue. I don't think we all maybe necessarily saw it for kind of the massive kind of capital efficiency that it is now and things like that. But there was this thing, like we could build a recurring product like others were doing. So I think we just kind of knew it was this thing that we could do. Yeah.
And why this philosophy? Where did this philosophy of never fire anyone come from?
Oh, I just could never fire anyone. I don't know. I don't think it's like a philosophy. It was just like, I mean, it's like, it's just, I think we've always known.
In the agency world, especially to maintain profitability, firing people is quite common. So I'm wondering why were you such deviants?
Yeah, I mean, I like the people I work with, and I don't think Chris and I would have we never looked at Wildbit as existing for anything other than the team. I mean, I know I say this a lot, and it's probably getting old, but like I always say, like Wildbit exists for the team. Like we're very product agnostic. And so, it was like together we were building Beanstalk while allowing client work to kind of do its thing. And we were all really excited for the day we didn't have to do client work anymore. Right. So it's like,
Yeah.
And so it was for all of us, like, how are we all going to let's do this, right? Let's get Beanstalk big enough so we don't have to do client work anymore. I mean, it became very much the collective goal of the team.
Yeah.
So
And when did Beanstalk launch?
So it'll be 10 years in October.
Okay,
or it is October next week. So October, I forget the exact date, but 10 years.
2007, October.
2007, yeah. Maybe November.
And how much revenue and profit did it make that first year? Like you're working on it on the side. Do you remember how much you made back then?
No, I don't remember. It was enough. I honestly don't remember how much it was.
Yeah.
I know I borrowed money from Chris's dad. So just in case, we borrowed, like, we used to bill in weekly iterations. So we would bill everybody like per person, per like who they were hiring on our team, per person per week.
Yeah.
And so I basically asked his dad for like 20 grand.
Wow.
Or however much it was. It was like, and I said, like, I'm only going to pull out every week what I would have done for consulting work just in case, to just kind of bridge the gap. And like, I wouldn't touch the money. Like I put it in one account and then would transfer it like week by week, like a crazy person. And then we didn't use all the 20 and we, paid it back like within 2 months or something like that. But but I don't remember revenue. I don't.
When did you get rid of Newsberry? This is my third question.
Yeah. So there's a blog post that circulated the internet that people still ask me about at like random conferences. That I don't remember the exact date. You could.
This is February 20th, 2012. It says.
That sounds about right. Yeah, because my oldest was like 2. Yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah. So at that point, we were, I think, almost all. I mean, we were all in on apps, like products. We had Postmark. We had Postmark, and so we had Beanstalk, and then Newsberry was kind of just sitting there. And the truth about Newsberry is, like, we aren't good at building products, or we've never really kind of spent enough time to be good at building products we don't use ourselves. Mm-hmm. And at that point, like, we're not marketers. Like that's the antithesis of who we are. Like now we're getting better as a company and we've hired great people to help us there, but we were not those people. We never sent newsletters to our own customers. So we had a very skewed perspective of how that process should work. And we were very stubborn. And so like, we were never good at building that product. Like it was a good product and people really loved it, but it was a distraction. It wasn't making enough money for the distraction it was causing. And so we had to shut it down.
So part of that choice was, and this is interesting, this is one trend that's come up, especially for folks that I've interviewed that have launched multiple things, is one of the advantages to launching multiple things is you've got a bunch of horses in a race and you really can see the slow horse. And so it sounds like Newsberry was your slow horse. You're like, compared to Beanstalk and Postmark, this thing isn't producing at all, right?
Yeah. And I think I love having multiple products. And like, I've talked to friends who, are like, you're crazy. You got to go all in on one of them. Like you'll get much bigger if you focus. But again, like for me, it's nice to kind of hedge my bets a little bit and to kind of have things in multiple places. And, they're all in different parts. They're like kids, right? Like they all have different needs. Like thankfully they didn't launch 4 at the same time, but we're like, all trying to just get the product market fit and all try, like they're all in different life cycles. And I think that was clear with Newsberry. It was like where it was to do anything bigger with it or to even just continue to grow it and to support it. Like we needed to have like more brain power in it. And it was either that or Postmark. Like we knew we weren't building a great product and we didn't want to use it. So it was like, so yeah, you're right. Like you can see them all, and I like having multiple. And luckily you get to choose what you work on. So
yeah. So Beanstalk launches in 2007. Postmark launches in 2010.
Yes.
And so what between 2007 and 2010? I'm guessing Beanstalk grew quite a bit.
Yeah. It was definitely making 100,000 the first year because, I don't know. I don't have them off the top of my head. I think, by the time we shut it down, it had to have been making, or by the time we stopped doing consulting, it was definitely making way past 100,000 a year. I mean, we were doing consulting work. We were doing more than $1 million a year in consulting work. So Beanstalk at that point was making a lot more than that. But you're right. The funniest part about growth for starting any app is like you have very unrealistic expectations about what's actually going to happen. And like I clearly remember we had thousands of beta testers on Beanstalk, and when we turned on paid pricing, we sat like I'll never forget. We did this like IKEA desk, and Chris and I sat there and we sent the email. And we're like, yes, you can buy. And we were so excited. And we're like refreshing the admin and like nothing's happening. And we're like, why aren't these people giving me their credit card? I don't understand. They love this product. This is so great. And we're like, refresh again. I'm like texting Demos, like the developer. And I'm like, is it broken? He's like, no, Natalie, it's not broken. I'm like, well, where are these people and their credit cards? And then you're like, hours later, the first one rolled in and you're like, yes. And then, it's slowly. But where Postmark, like our first month when we launched, we hit like $10,000 that month or something crazy like that, which was huge. But again, you can't replicate it because we marketed it to our Beanstalk customers. I had an audience, right, who clearly needed the product. Month 2 was not $10,000, but month 1 was like, and so I think it varies from I don't expect Conveyor to make a ton of money in the first year. Like I've projected it to make no money for the first year as we figure out what we're doing and all this stuff. But it varies.
How big was the team in 2007? Like, are we talking about 3 people? Are we talking about 10?
No, 10.
Wow. Okay.
10-ish in the 10-ish.
So the other difference.
You're asking me history questions. I don't have like a good
I know.
timeline.
It's okay. It's okay.
17 years.
I'm going to tease it out of you. But the other unique thing about you folks is a lot of people start as solo founders or them and another person, and they're able to, like, profitability is, we pulled in 150 grand, we paid out 50 grand in expenses, and then I paid myself 100 grand, right? Where that's profitable for a one person shop. But when you have 10 people, that's a lot more expense that your not your ceiling, your floor becomes,
right.
like, you got it's a much higher, right? Why do you think you were able to do that actually when so many other agencies tried that and it didn't work?
I think I've thought about this a lot because I talk to a lot of agencies who are trying to do this. And I think the biggest difference and what I tell everybody is you have to dedicate a person. Just start with one. If you don't dedicate, and so when we hired, we basically said, we're getting one, and that person cannot do consulting. And it's not an option. Don't tease it. Because you get addicted to that, right? Because the biggest challenge is like, I can work on my product this week, or I can bill $3,000. And it's like, what do I do? And we really committed to one person. And so we were like one person. It was Deem at the time, who's still a developer with us, still works with us. But he basically like, you don't get to do anything else. Like we're not gonna like, sell you out to like a client.
Yeah.
And so what that allowed us to do, and it's hard. Like we still need a designer who was doing client work. So like, there were definitely resources that we needed and we used on Beanstalk that we did kind of still sell to clients. But you have to put a dedicated person, because once you do that and once you promise yourself and you figure out the math, right, so that you can have that dedicated person, you can still survive off of consulting without that dedicated person. Now you're building something. Now there's value. Now that product only has to make enough money to cover their salary. It's like, okay, cool. Now it covers their salary. Bring a second person in and a third. And I think you can gradually wean yourself off that way. But if you dedicate, what I see a lot of agencies do is like, they don't. They're like, they have this great idea and they want to like spare cycles. And like, you don't have spare cycles, right? Because the minute, if you need those cycles to be profitable or whatever sustainable, then a client comes along, wants that cycle, and you're like, okay, but I can't work on my product. I got to go back to the client. And then it never gets done. It never gets attention, never gets iterated on.
Yeah.
I think like you have to kind of, you got to commit. I don't know. Like, I think at least that's the only way I see it as having worked for us.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I have seen that pattern in other agencies too, because every agency since 37 Signals has looked at that model and has said, that's the model, that's the ticket. And it's just even, I've even seen, did you employ a similar strategy when launching new products? Because I've seen single product teams try to launch another product and they fall into the same trap of they keep everybody on the same product, and it's just hard to get the next person working solely on this new thing.
So with Postmark, we hired somebody completely separate, because one of the things that we did for Postmark is the back end, and that I think was convenient for us. The back end of Postmark was not built in Rails because of the email kind of mail sending piece. We chose a different programming language, and so we actually had to hire some specific. So we had the same situation. We hired a dedicated person to build out Postmark, and they built it out in 3 months. And then, you start, our design resources were always the ones that we have a very small design team. And so like the design resources are always kind of like passed around.
Yeah.
But we did the same thing with that. And then DeployBot, you're right. That was probably the closest to that scenario where we're kind of like, we can spin out deployment tools and create a new product, but who's going to work on it? Well, the person is working on Beanstalk. So how do you do that without, And that, I think that became a unique scenario where that team basically said, like, we just want to try it. We're going to do it on nights and weekends for a couple of weeks and see what we could do. And so they kind of spun it out themselves.
Interesting. Do you have, one of the things that I did when I was running teams is when I had to quickly budget for a team member, I'd always add 30% to their salary. And that was kind of how I figured out the expense. Do you have a similar trick? Is that sound about right? About 1.3 times salary is kind of, and then if you multiply that across the whole team, you'd get about your expenses, or do you have a different trick?
I don't think I use a trick anymore. We're too many people. Like I plug it into like an actual spreadsheet and put like payroll tax and healthcare. And so like, I'm trying to think of what I did back in the day before it was a little bit more organized. And I have people to help me now with doing the finances too and stuff like that. But I think you're probably right. It's somewhere around 30%. I mean, we pay 100% benefits. So for us, it's like their salary, their payroll tax, their benefits. And then I don't really have a good formula for anything other than that. I don't know what retreats cost us per person, when we add a person. I don't know what I guess I could think office build down, stuff like that. But that just kind of lives in like I don't know what lunch costs us when we hire an extra person in Philly. Like, I don't think that way, but I, from a quick, like, what's going to really hit the bottom line, and that's basically salary and their payroll tax and health insurance.
I think the history is important because there's different folks listening to this. There's some people that they're already started. They have products out in the world, and their problem is they're not that profitable. They're at break even. They're maybe making 5% margins, and they're really not making a good return on their business yet. There's not a lot of cash accumulating in the business account. And I started in 2016, and so that's me basically. I'm pulling out dividends and salary, but there's not a good chunk of cash kind of growing in the business that I could invest in growth or something else. There's folks before that they haven't launched, they've launched something that maybe has revenue, but it's not even close to break even. And they're kind of at the beginning stage, maybe where you were at back in 2007, although that was a pretty good launch. You obviously had hit a nerve.
We definitely, yes.
Yeah.
And it was a different time, right? Like there wasn't a lot of, we launched and, people talked about it, right? Like I didn't need to go on product hunt and beg people to upvote something,
Yeah.
It was like, oh, a new app launched. Holy crap,
Yeah. It was news just because it was an app.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's really what it was. Yeah. And it was a nice design.
So we've talked a lot about your journey to profitability with the products. What were some of the biggest struggles along the way? What are some of the things that people didn't see as you were building this, as you were doing this? What made it hard?
So the interesting part about profitability for us is probably the last 5 years where things have gotten interesting, because we've always been very profitable, like extremely profitable, 35-40% margins, like doing really well, probably higher at some point earlier. And I think that the challenge that we ran into is we realized that you have to invest back, because you can't kind of stagnate. And I think what we ran into, and where I think our profit margins have dropped pretty significantly over the last 3-ish years. They're on their way back up, but you do have to invest, and you have to reinvest back, and you have to think about my thing now is I know my goal. My goal is 30%. I don't need more than that. Definitely don't want less than that. And so when I hit 30%, it's time to look and say okay, where can we invest better? What can we do better?
Mm-hmm.
And for us, it's always better salaries, better for my team. Usually it's my team, it's not like I have some magical go-to-market strategy that I can put more money into. But so we really didn't hire at all. So we didn't hire. Like I said, we had no marketing. So we had no kind of strategic growth initiatives. That's so dirty. And so, God. And so I think when Beanstalk started to slow down, which it did, because, a lot of other competition came into the market, and we were basically, if you build it, they will come, and, and not hiring and being really stingy with our profits. And I think that realization that no, that's not the right way to go. You have 2 great products, you have an opportunity to grow them, and you have a responsibility to actively pursue them if you want them to stay relevant, forced us to look at it again and start spending more money. And so I think the profitability becomes a goal, but I can't say it's the goal in and of itself. It's the means to, I think, longevity, right? To make sure that we're sustainable and around for a long time. But that also means that we have to be thoughtful about reinvesting and making sure that we're thinking about getting what we need to grow the business.
Yeah. And so would you say what, in terms of what affected your margins, was that competitors coming in and taking some of your customers? You had some churn with Beanstalk?
Totally. I think less churn and more on the drops and signups, right? So the net new and the whatever that is, we weren't losing customers as quickly as we weren't gaining them more. So we had built a product that was very heavy on the low end side. So $15 a month, $25 a month, and there was really good competition for $7 a month or free that came out, and also just a shift in the market. Like we were late to the game in some places and, had some brand, in hindsight, right? I can give you 3,000 reasons of why I think it's slowed down, but, absolutely, we did not see a lot of things. And part of that was just getting comfortable. Like those margins make you real comfortable. The lack of effectively like trying to grow a product and just sitting there and enjoying this really comfortable, growth in your MRR, and you're like, life is good. And we're paying out 10% bonuses twice a year, it was crazy. Like things were just nuts. And and then when it stopped, it was like, okay, time to be grown-ups again.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what we have to do.
So it sounds like new signups really slowed down. Was this both for Beanstalk and for Postmark?
No, just Beanstalk. Postmark has a totally different story. No, this was just Beanstalk. But Beanstalk was the biggest for us. I mean, it drove most of the revenue. Mm-hmm. Postmark didn't become big for a really long time.
Interesting. Okay, so Postmark was more of a slow kind of growth.
Yeah, that was our fault. It came in really hot and heavy in the beginning, but we had really significant product issues, like especially less feature stuff. The issues were infrastructure based, like actually making the product run well, which it forced us to focus so much of our attention on that we were not able to develop the product itself for a long time. So like we launched, it came in really hot and heavy, and then as a lot more competition entered the market, which is good, you're validating your market, but we were so busy heads down trying to keep everything alive. And so there's we lost customers because we were down a lot and just having lots of foundational issues, and spent years just kind of plugging holes and rebuilding it and making it a strong, product again. And now it's it's growing so awesomely. So, it's kind of shifting that.
Yeah.
Totally different. Yeah.
This would actually be a good time to jump ahead to a question I was going to ask later, but I think you've mentioned competition a few times now. And one of my kind of criticisms of startup culture and even bootstrapping culture is there's sometimes this feeling that, especially to people that are kind of boosters of those cultures, like you should build your own web app, you should start your own business, is that there's lots of space that, you can build something and, there's so many customers out there. There's enough kind of for everyone, and there's enough to go around, etc. And it just, that never made sense to me because capitalism is completely based on competition. And with most products, if I start using Beanstalk, I've got to stop using something else. If my team switches to Beanstalk, we're switching off GitHub or we're switching off something else. And so, do you want to talk a little bit about how maybe some misconceptions around competition that you had or you see other folks having?
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't necessarily disagree with the sentiment, because I think that on the flip side of that is oh my God, there's so many big competitors, I can never get in. But so much innovation comes from looking at the big competitors, seeing how bloated they are and seeing how slow they are, and finding a niche. I think the challenge that I run into, or I see people running into, is having a realistic expectation. So it is okay to pick a really niche market and say, I really want to do something special for them and build a really nice business around that. But being realistic, I'm picking a very niche market. It's only X number of possible people. It's, there's a market cap, and that's okay. And so instead of looking at it and saying I think project management sucks in all of these huge apps, and I'm going to take over the world and be the better project management app, but oh my God, I can't because they're all so big and they have more money. Well, it's yes, all of that is true. So what are you doing to the world that's going to convince all these people, all that momentum, to your point, to switch to your much better project management app? Is it 10,000 times better? Probably not. Is it, do you need to be that massive? Do you need to replace Jira right now? Is that your first step? It's probably not a good idea. So, I don't think there's anything wrong with saying, I see a problem in project management, but what problem, who you solving it for, and like start small, right? Like start thoughtful and figure it out. We've always competed against 500-pound gorillas. Like Beanstalk, it's GitHub and Bitbucket and GitLab, Postmark, SendGrid, and Mailgun bought by Rackspace and Mandrill and MailChimp. I mean, like always, we are always the tiniest little, but I love that because I'm like, I don't need a lot of money. Like I need 10% of the market, 5% of the market, because the market is software development and that's a massive market.
Yeah.
So like, I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
But, you know what I mean? People ask like, how do you compete? And I'm like, well, I do because I compete for this market, for this piece of it, for this type of user. And I'm very content with that. But I think a lot of people, they set out the wrong expectations, right? And so then they're really disappointed and then they don't know what to do.
Yeah. Do you think, like, what is it about your
question?
Yeah. What is it about going after that customer? Like you said, because software development is big, that's actually a good sign right away. There's a lot of money and companies and, products in this space called software development. And then if we go down to, source code repos and stuff like that, there's this kind of market. And you've said, okay, the gorillas are here, Bitbucket and GitHub. What is it about your customer that makes them seek you out, that makes them a profitable customer? Like, how did you find that customer, or why do you attract that customer?
That's the $1 million question, right? So that's like when you look at Conveyor. So we're like building this brand new product. And I don't know what makes us think that we can continually launch products that are successful, but somehow we don't know how to stop ourselves. And so we're going to do this again. And we look at it very carefully because we're like, okay, well, it's competing against a lot of those same things. And like, what is it? Who do we want to attract? Who are we solving this pain for? And I think what we've learned is like, we aren't going to stop. Like we ended up attracting an audience. Usually it's agencies or small apps, but basically people who realize that building software, they get paid for what they ship, not like the method in which they used to do it. Right. So if you're an agency or, you're paid by the hour to ship stuff. You're not paid to sit there and mess around and Git all day long and figure out how to branch and be in meetings to figure out process and do all this shit, right? Like that's not what you're paid for. One person pushes to the wrong branch, everything explodes, and nobody's paying you to sit there and try to untangle this mess for 3 days, right? And so we may not invent new technologies, but we are very good at taking difficult, annoying things that you don't get paid for and simplifying them. And so that's this very niche audience, right? So Conveyor is going to launch and we're not going to let you touch your repository. Like we're not going to let you push directly to your repository, right to the repo. You got to let us do it. You have access to it. We're not locking you, but we're going to create a lot of process and workflow to prevent you from yourself and to allow you to focus on what makes you money instead of like all this other stuff that's like surrounding it, which means that the person who loves to code in terminal is not going to want to use it, right? Like I know that, right? Somebody who uses Linux is not, for the most part, going to want, and I'm very much okay with that. Like there's something really comforting. And we're trying to scale it down even more. We're like, well, what types of agencies, what do they do? Maybe it's craft, right? We're like big fans of craft right now. And so like, and that team's awesome. And that audience is really interesting and they have a pain and they have a need and they appreciate what they get paid for, right? They're not the types of, I don't want to generalize, but we are trying to build it for the people who aren't patting themselves on the back because they got themselves out of some tricky Git situation or because they remembered to create a branch when they want, like that's not what we're building it for. People who are patting themselves on the back because they made a lot of money on that client and they delivered something really great and the client's really happy and it was fast and it was on time and whatever, right? Under budget, like that ever happens. And that, I think that's the thing. So like, we know who we attract. We attract people who like Wildbit as a brand, right? Like who don't want to buy from a 500-pound gorilla. I'm okay with that too. So we talk about that, that's
I think that's actually very clear. There's a really good lesson in that of, because people buy products for all sorts of reasons and they use products for all sorts of reasons. And often these reasons are not as rational as people would admit. So some folks love using GitHub because it is so sophisticated and they just love tweaking things. They actually like the emotional thing that they get when they fix someone else's issue. So if they're the person in the office that's fixing everyone's issue, it gives them kind of an emotional high of like, I'm the guy that fixes problems. Yeah. And so if you went to that guy and said, hey, we want you to switch to Bitbucket, he would say, no way. And he might not even articulate it or even know that the reason he's pushing up against it is if we switch to Bitbucket, I'm not going to be the hero anymore. I'm going to lose all this emotional validation. That's the word I was looking for. But you've identified this customer that isn't trying to get fancy with their process or their ideology. They just want to make money. And I think that's just a great picture of how you can be in a niche with big competitors and you can still win, because there's going to be folks that are like, listen, all I care about is shipping things and making money. And you could put that right on your homepage. We're Wildbit. We help agencies ship things and make money. And people who don't want to, get fancy with their process and their ideology. That's such a clear message, in terms of who you are, what kind of products you build, and what kind of customers you want to attract. And I can see right away that those customers would be profitable, because if you're making them more money, or you're enabling them to make more money, then it makes sense. Why would they ever leave? Postmark just works, right? That's the sense I'm getting anyway.
Yeah, Postmark just works.
Yeah.
Yeah. Postmark's funny because Postmark literally just works where people don't log in. Like, we can't measure our customer usage, or like happiness by like whether they log in, because they never log in. Why do they need to log in? You log in to troubleshoot, and Postmark's like set it to forget it. That's good and bad. I think there's probably some bad to that. We're just trying to look at it like, hey, remember us? Like, you don't wake up one day in 2 years and you're like, what's this thing that I paid for? I don't even know why I paid for it, right? Like, why did I pick it in the first place?
Yeah.
But yeah, Postmark just set it and forget it.
Yeah.
Developer tools are interesting. And this, but we've learned a lot over the years about how important it is if you're building a daily use tool, right? Like a daily use developer tool, not Postmark, but like a Beanstalk, like a conveyor, like a deploy bot. Very much a lot of that depends on that emotional feeling people have. That to your point, like where do they get satisfaction? Because they have to open it and log in and do their work in it every day. And so some people get satisfaction from knowing all the intricacies of how Git works and how to like change things and move things. And some people really get frustrated in that. And so if you give them something that shows them 3 billion options and it lets them get in trouble and all this stuff, and they're not going to get an emotionally pleasant, even though it's not your app's fault, like they're not going to be happy. You're not allowing them to get that like fulfillment that they need. Right.
Yes.
I think that makes a big difference.
Yeah.
You have to really know that. Where like Postmark's different. Postmark, like you make the decision once.
Yeah.
You're like, all right, we're going to pick an infrastructure product. Not everybody has to be madly in love with it.
Yeah.
It has to work.
Yeah.
But Beanstalk and Conveyor are different. Yeah.
So we've talked a little bit about you wanting to get back to 30% and a little bit about 30% profit margins and a little bit about, it sounds like the slowdown was in new, like acquisition, acquiring new customers. Have you done like what other things? Because there's a couple levers there, right? You can reduce your expenses, that can increase your margins, or you can increase revenue, that can increase your margins. What kind of levers are you using to get back to 30%? Are you focused solely on acquisition, or is there other things too?
So what dropped profit margins wasn't the Beanstalk slowdown; it was our response to it, which was hiring. So what actually dropped profit margins low was when we all sat down as a team and we said like, okay, we need to hire what I call like front of the house. Like we didn't really have a big front of the house. We were a team of designers and developers and QA. That's all we had. We fully product team. And so, and one support person, I think at the time. And so basically we're like, okay, we need to invest in what the front of the house, who's helping us actually grow the product. Because if you build it, they will come is not really, it just doesn't, it's much more crowded now, right? It's much louder. It's much more crowded. It takes a lot more effort to bring the attention outward. And so what we started doing is we started hiring a bunch of people. So we hired a head of growth, which we had never done before. And so we hired not when we were dying and on fire, we hired when we thought what we'd need in the next. And so took a big hit on profit margins, took a big hit on salaries for Chris and I, and basically said like, this is important. This is what's going to get us out. And so we took this really big profit sharing went down, everything. But as a team, we all agreed, like, this is the only way to maintain the business. So that shut it down. And now we've cut expense. There's not really much. I tell the team, like, there's not really much fat in what we do. We're all very kind of practical about how we spend money and what we do and things like that. So our levers right now is growth on the top end. So we just need to get the products, again, to be like that capital efficient SaaS business that we all kind of aspire to be building. Yeah. Get back to that, right? So where we are maxed higher at this point, I think, at least till next year. And which means everything now is just increasing our profit margin. So all growth goes towards profits. So it's a nice place to be. And so we're getting closer. We made some good progress this year. And then by next year, we should be definitely at 30%. Yeah. And that's just kind of, that's the only lever I'm messing with. Expenses, I mean, my number one expense is salaries. I'm not cutting salaries. So after that, you're looking at like software that, the apps that we pay for. So like on a quarterly basis, I do review and I'm like, who owns this? Why are we paying for it? And somebody's like, oh shit, I forgot to cancel. It's like, okay, so we cancel that. And then my second biggest expense is hosting because we run infrastructure product. So, it's a big expense, but we own all our own stuff. So that kind of helps with our costs. And so that's kind of it. There's not really much on the expense side. It's all on the top line. Yeah.
So you said, especially this past year, you really had to kind of learn some sales and marketing. And some of that's helped. What were some of the things that worked? What are some of the things, some of your kind of successes this past year?
Yeah. So I think I would say like you can see a very direct correlation or like a shift in the growth rate about 2 years ago. Okay. Maybe a year and a half, like I'd say like March, April of last year. Building up to that, I think just the act of doing things is really useful. So we just started to do, like we started a regular newsletter. We started to blog more. We started to, write better guides and things like that. So I can't say there was like some specific plan at the time, but just having people to think about that really, really helped. And this year, in January, we sat down and we kind of looked from a marketing standpoint or kind of, what are we going to do next standpoint. We read the book Traction. Have you read that book? Yeah. Yeah. And so we did the 19 step or the 19, method process. And we sat down as a team and we kind of looked at it. So like there's 19 different ways to hit your next level of traction. What hit me with that was that, looking at growth as a kind of ramp up plateau was really useful because I was like, okay, that's true, right? Like we probably maxed out word of mouth to some degree to hit our next level of traction. We could probably grow a couple more percent, but like, is that our next kind of level up? And so we looked at it and said, like, probably not. So like, what is our next level up? And what we decided to do, and what I think was so good about that was we decided to do things that would make us happy. So we basically, everybody was kind of all in on, or seems to be going all in on content. And it was just never my thing to get excited about like 17 ways to better transactional email. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. No, there's nothing wrong with it. I promise. It's just not me, right? It's not going to get me pumped. It's not going to get me like jumping out of bed in the morning, but we love making personal connections. Like I love meeting customers. It brings me and the team such energy and excitement when we like talk to people. And so we had hired actually like not a salesperson, but somebody who used to be in sales to come in to kind of join the success team, but doesn't really do reactive support, does a lot of like inbound calls and things like that. We have a phone number now and like he talks to people all day long and it's brilliant, right? So we're making those connections. And then we started doing like an outbound sales thing, but like I'm on the receiving end of all those awful outbound sales emails. And I could never imagine like us being the facilitator of that. But I said like, there's obviously an opportunity to do sales, right? Like that's a real thing. And so we decided instead to do what we called like creative outbound and basically mail people packages and handwritten notes. We like hand select companies we want to work with. Horrendously not scalable process, but it worked, right? Like we sent these packages, talked to people, made connections, and we started going to conferences, talking to people, making connections, sending entire delegations. We're not just throwing money around. We're like going to show up and talk to people and shake their hands. And so that's been working, like just being present. I started speaking more. I never did this before until like a one of an advisor was like, your job has to be a little bit more external. Like you got to go out there and talk to people. So that's helped. So I think like just kind of actively pursuing it, right? Instead of for years, it was like, oh, we got to build another feature. So when we hit our plateau in Beanstalk, Chris and I got like, we were like bad place emotionally, because up until that point, we were just building features. And so like, you can't correlate how I'm going to get out of this with like building features. Like that just doesn't work, right? Like everyone's like, well, how do you get out of this? I don't know, like build another feature. I obviously know that's not going to help, but when you don't have control over the actual way you are growing, it's a really scary place. So now just being more in control is really helping.
Wow. And you've already kind of commented on this, but I just want to ask you again, because so much of the problem is when you're in a plateau is just having an imagination for what's possible. So what was it? Was it just reading Traction that helped, or were there other things that gave you an imagination for what was possible that made you feel like, okay, we can, there is another step? Like, I often feel like folks are just like, they're in a plateau. They know they need to grow. They know they need to, increase their profit margins or whatever, but they just can't see anything above them. It's just black. So how did you, when you were in that emotional distress, were there some things you did to calm yourselves down, to get in a place where you could figure that out? Did you have advisors that were like, helping lead the way? What was it that got you out of the darkness there?
The first thing that I think really got us out of the darkness was in very practical sense, like Chris took a month off work, went hike Bhutan with his dad. I mean, this was 2010. This is before Traction. This is just last year. And then, no, 2012, 2012. I guess I'm trying to think. So, that helped from like a physical standpoint, like emotional standpoint. But I think what really helped was at some point, we have a lot of friends in the industry who run businesses much bigger than ours, and that we're able to talk to. And there was a realization at some point after all this was happening, somewhere in like 13, where we were like, why are we doing this? Like we had to ask ourselves the question, like, why are we running a business? Like why? And then when you realize that you don't have to grow for the sake of growing, that you're running a business for a lot of reasons. And then you're like, okay, well, why do we want to grow? Right. And then there was this very clear, like, we want to grow to stay competitive, to make sure the team grows, so we can get like all those reasons we wanted to run a business were going to be a result of getting out of this plateau. However, when I say plateau, like Beanstalk plateaued from a growth standpoint, or started to plateau, like slowed, never like actually, but you know what I mean? Like basically plateaued. And it was the largest product. Our decision out of it was not to actually invest in Beanstalk, but it was as a whole, like Wildbit was plateauing because Beanstalk was plateauing. But we stood back and said, what is Wildbit for? Why do we exist? What are we doing this for? And then I was like, okay, got it. I get what we have to do now. Let's look at all of our pieces, right? What do we do with this? What do we do with that? And then slowly kind of like weaned ourselves out of the darkness. So,
yeah.
No, it was a scary time.
Yeah, it's so funny to see the different stages, because again, I think in the beginning, you're just trying to build something that matters, that resonates, that brings in some revenue. And then you get to the point of growth and hopefully profitability. And then there's, a plateau there, and then you've got to figure it out again. And depending on your stage, if you're just starting out, the things you're wrestling with are way different than what you might be wrestling with over here. Although what's interesting is the trend in terms of how people kind of level up at each of those stages always seems to come down to personal health, relationships, and then eventually answering the bigger question, which is, why are we doing this? So like at the beginning, I think for me personally, why did I start, building products and going independent? It's because I didn't want to work for anyone anymore. So that was just like a really kind of short term, like, I don't want to work for anyone anymore. I want to live in a ski town. Okay. And now you've achieved it. But now I have to say, okay, well, I've achieved that. What what's next? Like, why am I doing this? Am I just doing it for, what's the bigger thing? And so it seems like the answer for you folks is that you just love your team. Like you want you want to support the team. You want to pay them good salaries. And it sounds like you do a lot with the team. Like this isn't a normal, a normal disconnected workplace. My sense from knowing people that work at Wildbit is that it's a community. Like there's a lot of life sharing going on there. Is that right?
Yes. I mean, we call ourselves a family. I know we're not supposed to do that. We got lucky. I mean, Wildbit didn't come together, to your point, around a product, right? So there's this like big difference, I think, when you're like a founder or two people and you're like, I have this idea, right? And you're like, okay, now you're rallied. You exist right now because of this idea. That's your glue. Then you add more people who you've sold on this product idea, right? Because that's what they're there to do. And so like slowly that balloons and it's a product that holds all of it in the center. Mm-hmm. And so if that, and a lot of times the product and the business are the same thing, right? So it's like this one thing that holds it. So if that fails, the thing falls apart. Mm-hmm. But Wildbit, because it didn't start with a single product, the glue is Wildbit, not any product. And so when Chris and I, like our reasons for running a business are simple, right? Like we want to make money, right? Like we want that financial freedom for all those things. We want to do things our way. We want to be in control of our future. We want to have fun and like what we do, right? And what we realized was like to do all of that, we needed to build a company that we were really proud of. And the only way I know how to build a company is to make sure that it supports the team. It supports the human beings in it, right? Because the business is not real, right? Like we just invented this thing. I call it the beast. And so like if the beast is like trying to constantly convince you that it is real and that it's important, that you're supposed to follow it, but in reality, it's not real. The only thing that's real is the humans, right? So like, who are the humans? It's me and my team. So then everything in the world I do has to be for those humans, right? And so like and then that becomes a very simple, like it's very easy to draw the line because I'm like, okay, well, the team's the one that actually works with the customer, not me. Mm-hmm. So then I have to do everything in my power to create this entire support system around them, right? Make them happy, secure, safe, all of those things so that they go confidently charging forward and making sure the customer is as happy as possible.
Yeah.
So I focus everything on my team. The team will focus on the customer. They have to put the customer first, but I have to put my team first. Yeah. And that's it, right? So that's like everything.
Yeah.
That's my happy place. I don't know. That's my secret sauce. I don't know how else or my invincibility, right? Is that a word? Yeah. And that's what'll keep us invincible because with them I can build anything. Mm-hmm. They can all implode. And Wildbit will rally. We will sit down at the table. We will figure this shit out. And we will build another product. But like that's what'll keep it around forever.
Yeah. I just find that perspective so refreshing. Thanks a lot for your time, Natalie. We've been talking for an hour, so I think this is a good time to end it. But just on that point, it is very counter to kind of conventional wisdom of product first. Some teams are process first. Some teams are technology first. And I just love that you guys are people first. And I just think that's an interesting model that people should consider. Maybe you could start with a group of people and do things, really make sure that group of people is awesome. And then they can do anything. They can figure out the product and the process themselves. So I'm thankful that you're able to kind of share that with us. I think that's really, really awesome.
Thanks.
So that is my conversation with Natalie. My thanks to her for sharing her collective wisdom from all of those years in the trenches. Go check out what they're doing at wildbit.com. And if you need transactional emails or if you are looking for something like Beanstalk, they have incredible products and also great customer support. I'd also say if you're looking for a job, there's no better company to apply for. They don't open up positions that often, but when they do, it's worth applying. All right, again, megamaker.co/profit. Go sign up there to get the case studies, and I will see you next time. podcast hosting is provided by Transistor.fm. They host our MP3 files, generate our RSS feed, provide us with analytics, and help us distribute the show to Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and more. If you want to start your own podcast or you want to switch to Transistor, go to transistor.fm/Justin and get 15% off your first year.